I've been seasick every single Hobart that I've done. And look, people give you some sympathy, but they're not slowing down the boat or making it more comfortable. You just got to work your way out of that. And it's about acknowledging it and then just working out a way to get yourself out of that hole. And it's really difficult because when you're out there, it's not a theme park. There's no off switch. You can't push a button and eject. You're on that boat in those conditions and you just got to work your way through it. But it's about just coming together as a crew and that common goal of driving the boat as fast as you can, 24 hours a day, and pushing through and some resilience to get to the finish.
You're listening to the Rising Tidecast, the podcast for sharing the stories, the lessons, and all the good stuff from legends in the marine industry. Welcome to another episode of the Rising Tidecast. I'm Steve from Rising Tide Film and excited to have Adam Hickey on the podcast today with us. Welcome, mate.
Thanks, Steve. Nice to be here.
So, you've got a really interesting background. I think you're originally from Melbourne. You spent your childhood motor racing and then found yachting a little bit later in your life, still young, in your 20s. From there, you've worked on some of the world's best boats and yachts with high-profile owners in, sounds like, the world's best locations, all the desirable places. And you've got 40,000 nautical miles under your belt. 3 Sydney to Hobart races with a division win last year and getting ready for number 4 this year, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
You also had a yacht management business and a yacht broker down at Delbora in Sydney. Beautiful spot.
Yeah, it's lovely.
Yeah, so safe to say you've probably got a few stories for us under your belt and a need for speed, which is cool. I'm curious, like, taking us back, what is it about racing that you loved, the motorsport racing, early on in life?
It was something I got into in my early teens. When I grew up in Melbourne, as you said, pretty like just regular inner city lifestyle. You know, we had beach holidays and whatnot, but it wasn't, out in the surf every week or anything like that. And my dad was always into his cars and motor racing. His boys' trip every year was going to the Formula One Grand Prix in Adelaide and through the 80s and 90s. And so we always went to, motorsport events and whatnot. And there was always an interesting car or something he had in the garage. And then in my early teens, I think I sort of said to him one day, I was like, it'd be cool to get into some motorsport, like whether it be maybe motocross or go-karts. And Dad had a little look at it and he sort of came back and he said, I don't think motocross, mate. Like, the whole, motorbikes is, he'd had one as a kid and come out with a few injuries and whatnot. I said, let's have a look at this go-karts thing. So, yeah, we bought a go-kart, then went about racing, in Victoria. And, that went on for 3 or 4 years, racing, every second weekend at different country towns around Victoria. Went to national championships, won a Victorian State Series at one point. And that was sort of still while I was at school. And then from there, we phased it into Dad and his business partner, who are both, you call them rev heads. Their business was not motorsport in any stretch, but they loved it and they started a Formula Ford team. And Formula Ford is a little entry-level category. It's an open-wheel race car that, most sort of guys that have gone on to, big forms of motorsport have gone through Formula Ford. And so we did that for a number of years.
Cool.
3 years in Victorian State Series for 2 years and then on to the National Series. In that National Series in 2003, I was competing against guys of the likes of like Jamie Whincup, Mark Winterbottom, Will Davison, and those guys have made careers out of V8 supercars in Australia and Will Power, who went on to win the Indy Champ cars over in the States.
That's awesome.
Yeah, which is really cool. And look, at the end of the day, that sort of phased out. You need a bit of a budget, with
when you get to that level.
And, talent takes you only so far, money takes you the rest, and, just sort of phased out and came to an end due to that sort of constraints.
Right. Did you end up breaking any bones?
No, there was a couple of good crashes, but maybe a rib or two in go-karts. But yeah, there was, no major bone breakages in the motorsport.
That's good.
Yeah, good, because I don't think motocross would have worked out too well.
No, I was going to say, like downhill biking in Whistler where we lived for a little bit, you always knew it's just as hectic, right? As far as breaking stuff, it's, when the season starts, when everyone's limping through the village in crutches and stuff.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
What is it that racing and motor racing gave you? I'm curious because you're still racing just in a much different scene now. So what is it that kind of has kept you in it for this many years? I
think it's just a general competitive nature. And when I did finish racing, and I do remember sort of after a couple of years realizing I hadn't competed in anything for, a while. And then the engineering side of and the technical side of motorsport is really quite high end. And, you have a skill when you're driving a car, but you also have to have a technical and engineering skill about how you set that car up for a certain track or certain conditions, which has just flowed on into sail racing, a couple of decades later for me with how we set up boats and how we sail them and just competing, within a team. So I think that's where it's sort of the
awesome.
connection. Yeah.
How did you then find the yachting industry? Like from your story and all the things that you've done, I would imagine your first gig probably looked a little bit different than your last gig. So like when you first got into it, what were you doing?
After the motorsport finished, at the same time, I was still living in Melbourne. I just got out of a business as well. I'd had a little hospitality events business, which hadn't sort of wrapped up too well with a couple of partners. I just finished uni. I just broken up with a girlfriend. I was still living at home. I hadn't really traveled. A lot of my friends had done some stints overseas. I was in a bit of a rut.
Yeah.
And I needed a change. I needed a circuit breaker, and someone had sort of said to me at a bit of a whim about they'd just been to Hamilton Island Race Week with their dad to race. And he'd said, that'd be a really cool place to go and get a job. And didn't think anything of the comment at the time. But a few weeks later, I was, just at home, still living with my parents. And I was like, maybe I'll have a look into this. And all through uni and through, my part-time jobs was hospitality. I worked in some pretty high-end restaurants at the end. And in a really short period of time, I applied for a job and I moved to Hamilton Island.
Wow, jump right in.
It just literally did. And it was an opportunity to get out of home into a paid job, really relatively safe sort of environment, and just a totally new space, completely different to the suburbs of Melbourne. It was then on Hamilton Island. The plan was then to work and then to save up enough money to go backpacking through South America. But when I was on Hamilton Island, through some mutual friends, I met a few guys that were boat captains. And they were running boats like, 82-foot Sunseeker, and a 70-foot Warren, I think it was. And I'd never seen anything like this before in my life.
Yeah, yeah.
And these guys were about the same age as me, maybe a little bit older at the time. And I was like, this is your job. These boats are amazing. And just getting a little bit of exposure then, they work for generally wealthy families and they're employed they bought the boats up from Sydney and the families will fly into Hamilton Island. They'll use the boats around it. And I was like, wow, this is your job, man. This is unbelievable. And at the same time, I was working with a couple of guys in the restaurant who had just come back from backpacking overseas and done a little bit of part-time work on some super yachts in a place called Palma, Mallorca, off the Spanish coast.
Yeah.
And so they started talking about their time doing that. So I knew that after my trip in South America, I was going to end up in Europe for the second half of my year away, backpacking and whatnot. And I knew by some point I was going to be out of money. And like most Australians, you maybe get to Europe and you go to London and get a bar job. But after those experiences, I was like, maybe I'll go to Spain and get a boat job.
Yeah, Slate said a bit differently.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, that's what I did. But I mean, just sort of back up one sec, like the move to Hamilton Island was like, it was a sliding doors moment for me because, it changed my life, not only like professionally, but also personally. It's where like I met my wife, like we just started dating at the time, but now like down the track, we're now married. We did the whole super yacht thing together and with 2 kids. It was about just a bit of a leap of faith and I didn't really know what it was going to turn out. And it's got me in this trajectory of life, both personally and professionally, that so here I am now.
When you first met those captains that were there, what was it about that experience or a conversation, or can you remember like stepping on one of their yachts that they had there and just going like, oh my God?
Yeah, well, it was just a world I'd never been exposed to. Never seen any of these boats, didn't know this industry existed, didn't know you could have a career in this. And I was like, how did you guys do this? And what did you, and a lot of these guys, I'm still mates with these guys today and they still work in the industry and, down at Royal Motor Yacht Club is the marina manager down there and a few other guys got yacht management businesses and stuff. And yeah, I mean, those guys grew up, I guess, a bit more exposed to the industry than I did, but that was amazing. And yeah, just then getting to see on these boats from top to tail, like it was generally after we'd been to the bar or the pub and they invited, a few people back and whatnot. And just being like, holy moly, just getting blown away by the possibility of the career and where a boat like this could take you in a profession, you know what I mean?
So then take me to when that second half of the backpacking season. What was your job there? Like, how did you find the boat? Did the connections help?
Yeah, look, they did help a little bit. But so then Jess and I met up again. I went to South America by myself. And we met up again and traveled Europe a little bit and then end up going down to Mallorca. And Mallorca is one of the Balearic Islands and probably more so known for like the island of Ibiza that everyone knows, but Mallorca is the island next to it. And Palma, which is a real super yacht hub, particularly with large sailboats, a bit like you might say on Tebe is like the hub for the big powerboats. And we literally got the ferry over and just sort of lobbed up, and we'd had a couple of little connections there, but we were just staying in a hostel. And the idea was just to get some day work, as you call it. And that's basically not as a full-time crew member, but just, day to day, helping them out like in the yards or in the marinas while they're preparing to go out for their season and whatnot. That was really hard to even just get a day's work for me. You know, I thought I was a reasonably capable person and I did have that, but literally sort of walking the marinas and the shipyards every morning, you know, ringing the doorbell and saying, have you got any day work? You know, nothing. And I got nothing. I got no work straight up. You know, it was really tough.
How long did it take you to find, I guess, and what do you think it was that actually, was it luck?
Well, yeah, it was. It was also Jess. So a green deckhand and a green stewardess, you know.
Could be a bit of a liability.
Well,
versus,
exactly. You're never going to get a job together. It's really hard. But look, we weren't looking for full-time jobs. We were just looking for sort of any work and some exposure. But at the same time, like when I was walking around, you know, those marinas and sneaking into the shipyards and whatnot, like just seeing these boats, like we're talking now a different scale. We're now talking 100 foot bigger, you know, 150 foot bigger, you know. And these massive sailing rigs. And I mean, I was still enjoying myself. I wasn't getting any work, but I was walking around every morning just being like, oh my God, have a look at these boats.
Good spot to have a coffee.
Yeah, that's right. You know, and through some connections and whatnot, look, Jess got a little part-time job on a boat called Antares, which is a 42-meter Royal Horseman built like ketch, a beautiful boat. And it was just a temp job. And for 5 weeks until the stewardess, the main stewardess was sort of coming on to take the role. So she went to, you know, do that week's work or the first week. And, you know, the captain had a couple of day workers on there. I don't think we're quite working out. And she said, oh, well, look, my boyfriend's looking for a bit of work. And he's like, all right, why don't you bring him down on Monday? We'll give him a day's work and we'll see what happens, you know. So I came down to the boat on Monday and just got a day's work. And he's like, oh, what are you doing tomorrow? I was like, well, nothing, mate. And he's like, well, come down tomorrow and have another day's work. And I just really applied myself, you know, and all I needed was just someone to give me a go just for a couple of days work. And then I was off from there. That turned into 5 weeks work, albeit just in the shipyard before they went out. So that was my first sort of exposure onto a super yacht, actually, you know, working in that capacity.
That's awesome. What was next in the super yacht sector?
So that season carried on, you know, and from there we then got invited to do a delivery trip on a 38-meter Perini called Northern Spirit. And all that was once again, it was sort of day work. The crew was taking the boat from Parma to Split in Croatia, which is 5 or 6 days sailing. And then they had a whole charter season sort of planned out. So they were like, you know, we just like another extra crew for the delivery. Would you like to come? Once we're done, we'll just fly you back to Parma and you'll be on your way. We're like, yeah, great. We'll come and do that. So we did the delivery trip across to Croatia, which was an amazing experience. Now we were sailing on one of these, you know, super yachts. Yeah. And we got to Croatia. There was a couple of days tidying up the boat. And they said, oh, well, what are you doing after this? And we're like, nothing. We thought you'd just send us back to Parma. And they said, well, we've got a charter for a week. Would you like to just go travel Croatia for a week and then come back and meet us? And there'll be another week's work. We're like, perfect. So this is where the adventure just sort of like carried on. You know, we then got to a country that we weren't even planning to go to. We then traveled around to the islands of Croatia, then came back and met them again, did some more work. And then, you know, prepared them for the next charter. And said, what are you doing after this? I'm like, nothing.
Still nothing. How much more convincing do you need? Like, thinking back to that time, like, what is it about your personality or you think characteristics or traits that was like super essential for you to keep getting asked that question? Like, can you come back? What are you doing next? Like the desirability. Yeah, well, I guess, you know, I was obviously showing some ability with regards to the work, but the big thing on the super yachts in regards to crew, and I learned this a lot further down the track, is like just being able to get along with people well. And the base of that crew on Northern Spirit were all Kiwis, and us being Aussies, like we got along really, really well. Yeah, good banter, I'm sure. Yeah, that was it. And I guess they got along with us. We were easy to have on board and to work, and we sort of did what we were asked, and we were easy to live with as well, because you do need to live with these people, you know? Yeah. So that was probably the basis of it. What happened next? Well, the next one was then, well, look, we're doing a charter over in Venice. Do you want to meet us in Venice? And we were like, yeah, sure. So they took off on a charter. Jess and I jumped on a ferry and went across to Italy, a country that we hadn't planned on traveling to. You know, we thought we were going to be back in Parma about a month before this, and traveled up through Italy. And by this point, they'd worked out that they'd needed a second stewardess to complete the charter season. And so they asked Jess if she wanted to stay on come on full time as a second stewardess for the last bit of the season. And yeah, we met them in Venice, did a bit more work, and they said, oh, well, that's all we've sort of got for you, Adam. We'll send you back to Parma. And by this stage, like the season had already started, but you know, it's very word of mouth. And, you know, Jono, the first mate on there, was like, well, when you go back to Parma, I'm going to let Dylan on Kokomo know that you're coming, and a couple other guys go and see them, and there'll be some day work, you know, some more work. And I went back to Parma, and,
just got exposure to about, 3 or 4 other super yachts, just casual work, 100 euros a day was the pay rate and lunch maybe,
Lucky, yeah.
And I just carried on to the rest of the season. And that sort of brought my year overseas to an end.
Yeah.
Doing that.
But built a great reputation, like for people to be able to like trust you and give that trust to their friends that are also captains and give you work. Like that's a big thing because everyone in the industry like does want to, at least I've found there's a lot of people that want to help. And when you find somebody great, like you do want to share that person around or that experience around, right?
100%. And I'm still friends with a lot of those guys today, we don't speak as much, they're still overseas, and a few other guys I've then sailed with down the track or done some work with, which is really sort of, interesting. Yeah. So it's even just that exposure's built some lifelong friends sort of out of that as well.
That's awesome. I guess after that season finished, then you obviously, it wasn't just a taste anymore. It was actually like,
well, I also saw what you could do financially as well, sort of see, okay, so you can get paid to do this reasonably well, or your expenses are covered. It's generally tax-free as well, earning euros. And there was some guys, earning really good money doing this in a professional sense. So at the end of that, I was like, went back to Melbourne with the idea of going back overseas relatively quickly and giving it a red hot crack, getting some qualifications and getting trained and going back overseas. And what actually ended up happening was I came back, and in the space of maybe being back in Melbourne at the end of 2008, 2 weeks after getting back, I broke my leg in a wakeboarding accident.
Oh, no.
Yeah, relatively bad. Ended up surgery and all sorts of stuff. And I was I didn't walk for 3 or 4 months. So that put that plan on hold for a good over 12 months. So
right, because you had to wait the whole season kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Look, I could just say, I was only just walking 6 months later, and, it's a very full-on physical job. I just wasn't capable of doing it. And so we just let the whole thing sort of simmer, and Jess and I lived in Melbourne for the year, but then it never sort of went away. I'd had a real taste of the travel, but then also going back and giving it a crack full time.
What did you do in that downtime that year, like that you think, I guess, set you up or helped better you or prepare you for the next chapter of getting back into it?
Nothing specifically. Like we were just trying to survive back in Melbourne. Like, as I said, I came back with a bit of travel debt, then broke my leg. I couldn't do any work. Like my base of work was just going to get a hospitality job, but I couldn't walk.
Right.
And so it was just sort of about, I guess, getting by. And by the end of 2009, we weren't hating living in Melbourne, but we weren't loving it. We're both working 2 jobs, and like Melbourne, I was a bit like, there's more out here. I want to go again,
especially coming from the season you just did.
Yeah.
Like, it's a bit of a contrast. Yeah.
Started 2010, we'd still stayed in touch with a lot of those people and said, hey, we're coming back over and let's, get qualified, do your certifications and all that, and give this super yacht, get a proper gig, and give it a real crack for a few years. And so I sort of did, got a one-way ticket, back to Palma with my bag, packed everything up in Melbourne, and started the next adventure of it, I guess, in a real professional sense.
Right. No more wakeboarding. Yeah.
No more wakeboarding too much after that. Yeah.
Take us through the career journey, because that, I think you've had like a pretty broad experience, and it's great, to hear that you started kind of at the bottom looking for day work and then worked your way up to, running these beautiful big boats as a captain. So I guess what was next in the career journey for you? Yeah.
So next was getting some qualifications. And look, at this stage, I think I was 27, which is relatively late to be getting into the industry. Like there was some of the guys that I'd worked with, or working with, had been working at 10 years. And some of the, I guess, guys that I was up against as deckhands were 20 years old, and, not saying that young is better in that sense, but it was a little bit of a factor, and so we logged back up in Palma and just started day working again on Northern Spirit as we'd done before, and gave us plenty of work there while we sort of went going look for Jess and I were hoping to get a job together, but once again a green stewardess and a green deckhand asking for a couple's job was pretty non-existent, just due to the nature of having couples on boats is a bit of a factor. Once again, it was just a networking thing and working really hard at the day work that I was given. And, between they all knew, mates and captains on other boats. And it was sort of like word of mouth type thing. Hey, you should go and speak to these guys, go and speak to these guys. And that's how, there's recruitment agencies that deal in all this, but that's how I got all of my jobs. And pretty much I've had all of my jobs ever has just been through networking and connection.
It's such a big thing in the marine industry, right? It's all 100%. Who you know.
Yeah.
Pretty
totally.
much.
Yeah.
And also having a great work ethic and doing the right thing and, building your reputation, but it is who you know.
Yeah.
When did you kind of take the next step in that career on super yachts?
Yeah. So it was then finally getting a job on a boat called Salute, which was as a deckhand role. And I thought, being 27 and we were looking for a couple's job and that wasn't an opportunity on there at that time. But I got offered the position of deckhand on that boat and I joined that. That was a 56 metre sailing boat. So it's like 185 feet. It had the tallest aluminium mast in the world at 75 metres.
Wow.
It was only about 2 years old at the time, Dutch owners, and was a really cool program, a mix of Kiwis and English crew. And got an opportunity to join that, full time for the season as a deckhand in a paid, position and live on board. And that was the turning point,
right,
where I guess it became professional.
And so you're a decky on that one for the season.
Yeah.
And what was that, I guess, like in contrast to the positions that you had before?
Yeah, well, living on board was one, sharing a cabin with the chef who was a female Kiwi. And she was a crazy lady, really good chef though. Yeah, it was going from that transition from going home every night to literally living on board and moving all your stuff on board this boat. And that is now where you live.
Yeah.
You are living on board and everything's, covered when you're on there and you really sort of go to no fixed address, So that was the main change. And then working, within the crew and, and the hours were a lot longer.
Yeah, right.
Especially when you go out on charter, or when the owners came on board, the boat runs nearly round the clock,
Yeah. You're always doing something, shift work kind of.
Yeah, early mornings, it's just you're on. You're just on sort of all the time, There was some downtime, but ultimately it was an amazing experience because you also didn't spend any money. So it was a great saving tool as well. You literally go 3 months without spending a cent because you're just working,
With the added, job scope, did you still enjoy it the same or was it a different kind of enjoyment?
Yeah, I was really lucky with that boat as well, that was a really busy boat in the sense the owner could never sit still. So, in that season, we moved anchorages every day, started, I can't remember, that season started back in Venice of all places and all the way down the Croatian coast and into Greece and then across to Sardinia. And, it was like every day we were doing something. So we got these little micro exposures to all these places around the Med, and this is where the miles just started to clock up and then the experience started to clock up as well. One interesting story about that season was because we didn't get a job together, Jess took a stewardess role back on Northern Spirit.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay.
And so they took off in a different direction, that season in the Med. And there was a chance that we may bump into each other, but nothing was guaranteed or anything. And I don't recall how long we hadn't seen each other by this point, but just by chance, we were coming down Croatia and heading for a Greek island. And Northern Spirit was on a charter and they were coming on a direct sort of, course for us to Croatia.
Yeah.
And it was just like, they just popped up on the AIS on the radar. It was like, wow, I knew roughly where they were. And I was like, literally going to sail past each other, middle of the
awesome.
Adriatic Ocean, beautiful day. And everyone, because a lot of the crews knew each other, I said, there's Northern Spirit. So that's where your girlfriend's were. I said, yeah, that's right. And the owner said, is your girlfriend on that boat? I said, yeah. And he goes, do you want to stop and swim over and say hi? And I was like, oh, no, John, don't be silly. No. We'll just wait. That's all good, He goes, no, I really think you should. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to answer that and have a think about it. I'm not going to ask you again, but I think you should. And I was like, all right, so this is the owner of the boat.
That's amazing,
He's got his family on board. And so
good guy.
It was really nice actually. And Northern Spirit popped up on the horizon. And so just, in the middle of, we radioed them, the captain sort of coerced, and there's two super yachts just sort of bobbing, a couple hundred meters apart, relatively close, just in the Adriatic. All the guests came up on deck. I put some flippers and my boardies on, jumped in, swam over. They put down the boarding ladder. I jumped up, said hi to Jess, gave her a cuddle and whatever, said hi to the other crew, and the charter guests were loving it. And I jumped back in the water, swam back over, and boats just sailed off in different directions.
That's straight out of a movie.
It was a little bit. And at the end of the season, I remember being back in the bar in Palma and a few people coming up to me and be like, you're that guy that swam across. You've been giving us a bad name, mate. My girlfriend stuck into me. The story sort of got around a little bit. So
imagine you proposed. That would be the peak.
Yeah,
no one would ever tell.
Yeah. So that was a pretty unique thing about that season.
That's amazing. Yeah. Oh, what a cool experience. And then what stuck out to me is the owner, right? So I think we think or maybe perception of the people that own these beautiful, huge super yachts, they might be in their own world, but with you, it sounds like you had a great connection with him and he looked out for you. What is it, I guess, about him and about other owners that you've worked with that really stands out that maybe is perception that people have that's not the case?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of perceptions out there. I don't know whether it was luck or whether it was an attraction thing, But I guess landing where I did in the large, on sailboats, and like sailboat owners are different. Like they are different to big powerboat owners, and you even see that down in in the harbour and smaller boats as well. But I guess maybe it was a bit of an attraction thing, is just that, the connections that I'd made with people already working on those boats, I was sort of had similar, I guess, ideas and values with. I never worked on a big powerboat, but from what I understood, they were a lot more formal, There was clear and defined lines, like in some cases, like deckhands were never to be seen by the guests, They'd be wearing all whites, all that. Well, on sailboats, it was still a very clear and defined line if you're a crew member and a guest, but like there was mix across those lines a bit, still professionally, where we got to go along on the adventure and the journey with them as crew.
Right.
And to experience a lot of things. And so we had quite nice relationships with them, and that went for all the owners, and even this racing yacht that I'm on nowadays, those owners are really inclusive and they're really intrepid and adventurous people. So yeah, that's been one thing. And as I say, I don't know whether that was luck or just the attraction maybe that landed on my feet in that regard. So
I mean, that would elevate the whole experience of what you're doing, because being part of the journey versus almost like being on someone else's journey, it changes, I guess, what you enjoy about the job, right? And how you're getting on with, the people that are with you and your crew, and I guess the owners that you're interacting with every day.
Yeah, definitely. And look, once again, like I'd never worked on a big powerboat, but I'd heard some stories about some guys and girls not having great times on them, They didn't really move that much in some regards, or as I say, that it wasn't about the adventure. And, there's some rolls on some big super yachts, like these 70, 80 meter, super yachts you see overseas. Like there's a team of generally, like girls working in the laundry that wouldn't see the light of day every day.
Yeah.
They're literally full time in the laundry in the bows of a super yacht.
That's
a completely different experience to being, like a deckhand, like moving around the med.
And I'm sure every boat's different too. Like they're not all like that. But yeah, I would imagine that's not the experience you dream of when you sign up for that. No, it's definitely not.
Yeah, so I was lucky in that regard. And yeah, the owners I've always worked for were super nice. I don't think I'd ever stay on with sort of a program if the owners weren't sort of, nice, because it just makes it too hard otherwise. Yeah.
And what you value and stuff. So
yeah.
I guess, when did you decide to make the leap and become captain?
Yeah, so I was on Salute, then Jess joined Salute. We finally got that couple's job and we worked on there, for the next 3 years.
Did that sell it into the owner, the swimming across to their boat?
Yeah, well, I guess they knew her and stuff, and by that sense, and that sort of worked out. And I mean, it also came at the cost of someone losing their job, and that is also the brutal side of the industry from a crew perspective, is that there's some guys that have really long, illustrious careers and stuff, but, I've seen people lose their job literally overnight, basically because maybe the owner's wife doesn't like them,
right?
Or they're just not getting along with people, and it's like, hey mate, pack your bags, we'll be in port tomorrow and you're out of here, sort of type thing, Yeah. So it can be a bit cutthroat in that regard, like fair work doesn't really exist, in the maritime world offshore. So that came at the cost of someone who'd been on the boat, but the captain made the decision that combination wasn't quite working. And, we were sailing in Gibraltar to go across the Atlantic, and he sort of called those people into the cabin and, one day and said, hey, tomorrow you're off the boat in Gibraltar and we'll organise, flights home for you. And so that's when an opportunity for me to get a promotion and then Jess to join sort of happened. So then we did that for the next few years, across the Atlantic a couple of times, through the Caribbean, up through Cuba and into the US and Bahamas and all that. And then that time was sort of done. And that was not so much driven by Jess, but we wanted to go home. That was sort of 3 years now. We'd saved up a bit of money as well. And she was a bit over the industry and the travel by that point. I think for her it sort of served its purpose. And so we moved to Sydney.
From your perspective, but also from other people that you've spoken to, that, they do their time and then their time comes to an end and they're ready to go, back on land. Like, what's the difference and what is it that maybe you find looking for? And then once they've found it, it's kind of, okay, we're done here. We can go on to the next thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for Australians and Kiwis, it's a long way from home. A lot of English work in super yachts over in the Europe, but that's, it's like just a short trip back to home. And so we use a lot of our leave time just to come home, not necessarily go on holidays. So, I mean, there's some guys that have gone on and still work in the industry now, but yeah, I guess you maybe get to a point and that becomes hard as well, when you're then getting down the track with your relationship into marriage and kids and that sort of stuff. It's difficult to manage. Complicated unless you choose to just live over in Europe like, a few guys do. But, that was sort of like the turning point. I wasn't done with the industry or crewing. So we came back to Sydney and Jess she went land-based and got a job in marketing. And I then, got an opportunity to be a captain of a chase boat. So when I say a chase boat or a tender to a larger sailboat called Sarissa, which is Australian owners, really like prolific Australian owners. And they'd bought, you call it a tender, but it's a 16 metre or 52-foot tender. Yeah. It's not going, it's not going in the boat.
No.
And it was sort of becoming popular sort of, 8 or 9 years ago with these big super yachts and then get these chase boats. And so, I got to come on that program, employed as to be the captain of that boat and run it in conjunction and support the larger super yacht. And then that, set off, then another round of, I worked within that program for sort of 6 or 7 years, another round of huge adventures and that, a whole bunch of stories with that one as well.
Seems like the industry and what your roles are in them is just riddled with like, oh my God, this is real life, or I can't believe this is happening. But also just like things that most people would be like, did that actually happens? Like what sticks out to you?
I guess going to that like program, like on the Salute program, like there was pretty high bar, but then going into the Sarissa program was next level. So that was a full custom made, fully designed, super yacht from the ground up specifically for the owner. Where the Salute was somewhat of a production boat. They're still 56 metre, but, the running budget was healthy, and getting a brand new boat with 0 hours on it that I was now the captain of, that I got to go to Sweden and spend 8 weeks in the factory there building and putting it together and whatnot, commissioning it, like that was then now sort of getting next level. And the level of responsibility then really, stepped up as well with running that. So
when you're building it, like, do you ever think that that's what you'd be doing?
No. Well, I mean, if we fast forward, like when I was employed, like I didn't have much, I was employed, the boat was well in build already and I didn't really have much say in the boat. But, a couple of years down the track, the owner commissioned a second one of these, which I did have a lot of input after running that boat, and he wanted a second one. So then was running 2 of these boats. One was out in Tahiti and one was here in Sydney. But getting to specify that boat, for what we required to take this boat well offshore and do some of the adventures and stuff we did in some really remote parts of the South Pacific was a pretty cool experience. Once again, there was a budget set, but it was really healthy and it saw fit and it ticked the box. I got to put it on and bits of equipment and additions and changes, and that was a really cool process. That was really cool to be involved with.
Was there an adventure that stood out to you that you can talk about? I know there's like a lot of NDA stuff.
Well, I don't think I'm under NDA anymore, but I guess following on the theme of really, like intrepid and adventurous owners, their idea was to get away, as far away from people as it possibly could when they had that opportunity. Really, really prominent sort of Australian owners in the media, and really super busy. And when they went on holidays with their kids, it was to spend quality time with their kids and to go on an adventure, The owner, I can think of some times like in New Caledonia, the Southern Lagoon there was amazing cruising down there, but there's parts of that are uncharted, right? Not saying that they're not explored, but there's no charts for them is what I'm getting at. And so you don't just charge down there in a 40, 5 metre, 30 million euro super yacht, just go, we'll anchor up here, But he would be like, right, you should be attracted to these areas. There's no charts for that. Let's go check them out, you know? And so with the tender or the chase boat, we were able to go down there and check these areas out, first, and then work out anchorages and if there's any sort of bommies or issues in the area. And then, the super yacht would come down and we'd sort of explore into some areas that felt, really, really remote, out there. Yeah, some of the stuff we did in the remote areas out in Tahiti was, just next level as well.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, just the idea of being able to explore somewhere where not many people have been, like, that's definitely an allure of being on the water, obviously, but also like having the capability to do that with the boats that you've got, the crew that you've got.
And knowing that these are places that on my own, unless something dramatically changes, like I win the lottery or something, like I knew these places I'm never going to go to. So having that opportunity to go to them with that equipment that you have at your disposal with owners that are really sort of pushing to see how far we can, adventure out there, it was amazing. It was really cool.
What did the rest of your career look like before you was that towards the end? Like how many more years were you on that boat?
No, that was sort of the first few years of the Sarissa program. Yeah, we were then, I then, as I say, then had 2 boats. So one was sort of retired. The original one was retired to Sydney. And then the new one that we specified went out to Tahiti and joined the program. And so, this was sort of getting a little bit, I don't know, towards 2015, 2016. By this stage, we were starting to look at like getting married and, starting a family, and this overseas travel was going to be, I was away probably 6 months of the year. Yeah. So it was getting a little bit tricky. And so, look, they were good enough. I stayed on the program then, just Sydney based for a couple of years, just looking after the boat in Sydney, but then also transitioning and looking after some stuff at their estate, in Sydney.
Well, good people want to keep you on, right? Like when they find a good person, like you don't want to lose that person, right? So that sounds like they kind of found work for you because they trusted you. And
trust is a massive thing when you're inside their circle and you're looking after their kids, about privacy and security and all that was really high on their agenda. And so once you're in that circle, they sort of want to keep you there until, it sort of maybe doesn't quite work for them, in some regard,
Yeah.
So yeah, that was an amazing time. I mean, one story just about, some of the stuff we did out in Tahiti, I think is probably worth mentioning, was the owner, his massive, loved his spearfishing, like huge into it, and really good free diver and really good spear fisherman.
Cool.
And wanted to go to, like some pretty wild places and go spearfishing. And I sort of scratched my head at some points thinking like his, like personal insurance, like policy must be off the scale because what we were doing, he would, they would go down with, like 44 Magnum rounds, tucked in their wetsuits.
Yeah.
So, if there's any sharks, they'd load them onto the spears. Never happened, but that's the genuine risk of some of the places that we're going to with some pretty big wildlife down there.
And to think someone like him was going down and risking it all, like
but he loved it. And so we were out. There's a group of atolls, like about 200 nautical miles, like northeast out of Tahiti. Like one's called Rangiroa and another one Whakarava, and I don't recall. But they're essentially sunken volcanoes. And so you have, like an inside of these lagoons, and there's a pass to get into them out of them. And these passes are a bit like, bar crossings, huge amounts of waters move in and out of them when they ebb and flow, and you get massive standing waves in that. And one afternoon, there was a plan to go spearfishing outside, right? So that's just getting through this. And I was like, okay, but maybe I didn't look into it too much, but I sort of went, oh, well, everyone must know what's going on. Yeah, let's load up the gear and let's go. And we got to the pass. It was ebbing like really heavily. And I was like, you want to go spearfishing outside. How are we?
You see how much water is moving.
Wow. And Greg, the captain of the Superyacht, was like, no, we'll be right, mate. We'll just stick to the side here in the pass. And we bumpy, but I think we'll get out. I was like, yeah, okay, I guess if we stick to the side of the pass. But generally what happens in those situations is you get sucked to the deepest part of the channel because that's where all the water's moving. And so everyone was getting their gear on and I was driving the boat and I sort of soon realized that I was like, oh, we're not going to get through the side of this pass. We're going straight through the guts of it. And I can't turn around now, and this is like remote. This is not like, the bar crossing at Port Macquarie where Marine Rescue will come out and save you. This is like full remote. And I was like, well, we're in this now. And we went through like probably 4 or 5 like 10-foot standing waves. Like I was up to my knees, like in water and just sort of punching through it. And like equipment was coming out of the boat left, right and center. And I thought like, the water was over the roof, and we got through it and we got out and we got spearfishing. Caught nothing.
I was going to say, no, that's the worst.
Yeah.
But the bet, like a crazy story. Like,
we got back into the pass, it was all fine. And like a few of us still mates with a few of the crew today, and that's still a story that comes up because, as I say, like that was a really remote place. And if that had gone wrong, I actually don't know what would have happened.
Yeah. No backup plan.
No backup plan and really sharky sort of place.
Yeah.
Ebbing, you're just out in the ocean.
Yeah, right.
Like I just don't know what we would have done. But anyway, we got through it.
Part of the adventure. Yeah, here to tell the story.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's the allure, I guess, right? For guys like that do enjoy the remoteness. It's just another kind of like, ooh, we could do this. And the part of the adrenaline and very, very cool. Not so cool when the pressure's on to keep everyone safe, I would imagine.
Yeah, but there was a lot of pressure, like, working on these boats, you still feel it today. Like, at the end of the day, you are the captain and the responsibility is yours, to keep everyone, safe. And I know I had a few, not sleepless nights, but, a bit of anxiety going into some trips sometimes and bits and pieces about making sure it all goes to plan and that you are being safe and keeping everyone safe,
Yeah. It's a massive responsibility. So did you go to other boats after that?
No, that was actually sort of like the end of my, I guess, career professionally working on boats. Because to say, like, we were, starting a family at that point and, it's a really, when you're working for a family in that private boat, sector, whether it be full-time crew or even, like in Sydney, and you might be going home every night, you're still very much the beck and call of these owners. And you sort of say, the crew refer to them as my owners. And it's true, they sort of do own you in a way, So there's a lot of weekends, spent on standby, where you can't plan to really do much or go far. There's a lot of, mates' weddings that you miss because oh, they're not sure if they're going to use the boat or not. I mean, they're relatively respectful, but they pay you to do a job. You know, I'd worked most Christmases and Boxing Days and New Year's for, 10 years there. And then, say starting, having a young family, just sort of knew it's not quite thinking it's how we want that as a family.
Very challenging.
Yeah.
Especially then, I would imagine family's important to you and being there, I think, and being accountable. And yeah, it's a huge thing. And that doesn't really come with that, does it?
That's right. I mean, some guys do make it work and it works for them. But we just sort of, decided that would sort of, be it and finish up on that program. But then another, I guess door was opening at that point with the sailing side of things, which then gave them the opportunity to, do, because I was working every Christmas and Boxing Day I couldn't do, like I said, into Hobart. So it gave them the opportunity to then step into that world.
Right.
Yeah.
What's something or a couple things that you think of that you took away from that chapter of your life that you're super thankful for?
Like a lot of friendships. Like I'm still friends with like some of these guys that gave me the first, day's work, way back in 2008. And then some of the guys that I worked with have now gone on to be Superyacht captains themselves. And, they started below me and come up and just sort of gone through. So yeah, probably like, the friendship, and I guess just through that, just the mindedness with these people, really grateful for, the travel that I got to do during that time. I literally stamped out a passport, which is pretty cool, and went to go to countries and areas and places that I know that I never would have gone to.
Right.
So yeah, really thankful for that.
The whole worldly experience, I think, adds a lot to who we are as people and how we see the world and interact with other people. There's just something about being able to be a part of different cultures that adds, a lot to life.
Yeah, definitely. You can tell when someone's done a fair bit of travel, when you meet people, we might be in different industries or whatever. Yeah, when you say worldly experience, it's been a great, thing for me, yeah.
And then sailing back here, so back on land, but then got into, Sydney to Hobart races and stuff. How did that come about? What were you looking for?
So, backtrack once again, going all the way back to Palmer in 08, I met a couple of guys, one guy in particular. We went on separate, he was in Superyachts. He was from Melbourne as well. We got along, but look, we sort of loosely stayed in touch, and he did a bit of time overseas, and sort of roughly the same time that I moved back to Australia and got that gig running the Sarissa Chase Boat program, he moved back and got a gig running a sailboat for a family here in Sydney, and we were just mates. And so, that just started out. They started doing a few, twilight, Wednesday night races in Sydney Harbour. And by this stage, I didn't grow up in the marine industry when we've been through that. So I didn't grow up. I learned how to sail on massive super yachts. My first sailing experience really had to learn was on a 38-meter sailing ketch, which
straight
is
in the deep end.
Yes, yeah. But at the same time, not sort of undermining in any way, but they are easy boats to sail. Okay. They're technically advanced, but there's not much sort of tuning about them. And sailing in the basic sense is relatively straightforward. You can teach someone to sail, in a day, but to the intricacies of actual sail racing and the experiences there, that's another aspect of the industry that could interest people is you got these guys that are professional sailors. That's what they do. They're guns for hire. They sail on the world's biggest and best and fastest, GP boats around the world. Yeah. And it's a whole different skill set.
Yeah.
Whole different skill set.
Yeah, right.
And so started out, just doing a little bit of sailing, thinking I was a bit of a legend here, and soon worked out I know my way around the boat and a winch and sails and that sort of stuff, but actually proper sailing is another skill set altogether,
Right. How did you find a boat or a crew, or what was it that I guess got you into the racing circuit around here?
So lucky enough with my mate Phil, who was the captain of this boat, the owner upgraded it into a boat, a 78-foot hook design, which is like a sort of bit of a custom boat, like a classic looking sort of boat, but he upgraded it into a boat called Drumfire, or Oriton Drumfire as it's known on the racing scene. They just started out doing some twilights and whatnot, and then, did a Hamilton Island race week. And then it evolved into them, campaigning to do the Sydney to Hobart. Now, this is not a program I'm involved with in a paid position. This is just being asked to come along and sail the boat as crew.
Yeah.
And got those opportunities to, go and, up to Hamilton Island, do full, weeks regattas and whatnot. And then they campaigned in the 2018 Sydney to Hobart, which I wasn't able to do. I was still involved employed, and they wouldn't, it wasn't appropriate for me to have the time off that time of year to go and do it. Which
plus
is
all the training you need too as well.
That's right. Yeah, and that was another sort of factor in finishing up in that professional crew, was then having that, being I want to do this next year and having the opportunity to do it, And so, yeah, that's what it all evolved into.
From an outside, it's obviously like Race That Stops Nation. You're the pinnacle of racing here. But like, what was the allure for you?
Well, I think it was when I was then back in, like I didn't grow up on boats, but like, about the Sydney to Hobart, I didn't grow up playing cricket, but I know about the Boxing Day test, and it's one of the big events, as you say, and so I knew about it. But then when I moved to Sydney and then started working on the harbour and, on those days and seeing the fleets and being around the CYCA and seeing some of these boats, I was like, wow, mate, like to do a Sydney to Hobart one day, that's on my list now. Like that is on my list. I mean, I wasn't sure, how that would ever sort of come to fruition, but just being involved with that Drumfire program as that developed and then, got the opportunity to do it. And yeah, it was amazing. I thought I was really thankful and privileged to do one, and now it's been like 3 and lining up to do another one. So
you're on to number 4 now, but like, what was that first one like? I'm curious as far as even training, like what do you do mentally, physically?
Yeah.
And then part of the crew, like that you all got to be in sync, right?
So I guess you think, like I thought that I was a pretty seasoned sailor by that stage, but like definitely not. I'd done a lot of sea miles, I'd done deliveries across the Atlantic, but it's very different to like sail racing a boat, 24 hours a day. I mean, the really cool thing about the Sydney to Hobart is it's like the Melbourne Cup. It's like, Boxing Day test. It's like the AFL Grand Final. It's one of those things that people tune in to do, but it's actually something that people can do. Right. As an amateur, you can go in the Sydney to Hobart and compete against some of those GP boats and professional sailors, and you can win it. It's very hard, but it's possible as an amateur to do it, where you can't do that at the Bathurst 1000 or the Melbourne Cup or Grand Final day, you know? So that's sort of the cool thing about it. And then on that very first day, being on the harbour, sailing out with all the crew, I was a little bit overwhelmed, to be honest. And, like you get the harbour to yourself. There's thousands of boats, but there's the restricted zone the exclusion zone all the way down the harbour. Yep. And on one of the busiest days of the year, like in this yacht race, and you get that runway to yourself. And it's pretty cool sailing out there on that day.
That is awesome.
Yeah, with all the crew. It's sort of, hair on the back of your neck sort of stand up.
When you're starting and then you rip out the heads, like what is that like being on the boat once you guys are obviously underway and headed for the next kind of adventure till you get down there?
Well, it all comes down to the conditions you've got, and that's the thing. Like if you did just a regular sailing trip from Sydney to Hobart, it's relatively straightforward. I mean, Bass Strait's pretty formidable, but the fact is that it's a race that starts at 1 p.m. on Boxing Day. So you don't get to choose when you get to go. You just get the conditions that you're given, and there's been some pretty, big seas out there. There's been some really light seas and becalmed and sitting there with no wind at all. The team really comes together once you get out of the heads there because there's no other noise around. You got 16 of us on board, and then you just sort of go into this crew rotation of 4 hours on, 4 hours off. And the objective is 24 hours a day is to trim the boat to the best of everyone's ability and steer the boat, to get it down to Hobart as fast as you can. There is obviously, always considerations on safety and whatnot, but, not on the comfortability. It's very uncomfortable at times, very uncomfortable. I mean, I thought was pretty good, but I've been seasick every single Hobart that I've done.
Right.
And look, people give you some sympathy, but they're not slowing down the boat or making it more comfortable. You just got to work your way out of that, and come good. And that's, what it is. It's a real mental, physical battle as well. You get down to Hobart and you're pretty beaten up.
What's the training regimen that you guys do? Because I know a few people that do it, and it's, you're training consistently multiple times a week up until that. So what's that like?
Too much on the boat training. I mean, I've always been, and this started back in my motorsport days, was a relatively, like I put a lot of effort into my physical training myself. And so I always like to try and keep relatively fit. And I sort of find that the fitter and stronger you are, that when you're like in situations where you're being pushed, you're better for it. So I'd always train as much as I can just to prepare myself physically, for it. And then as far as, the training goes, there's a couple of lead up races that you have. We had one last weekend up to Cabbage Tree Island, which is off Port Stephens, and that was about a 30-hour race. So you got to manage the fatigue as well. There's not much downtime, and sometimes when you do get that downtime, you don't get any sleep because the conditions might not allow it.
Right. Yeah, it's just crazy to think a 30-hour race is just training for a big one.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, totally.
So that first time you did it and you crossed the finish line, what was that like for you?
I remember we crossed the finish line under the spinnaker, and I was doing the halyard drop for the spinnaker. So I was sort of by myself, just up forward on one of the winches, or everyone else was in the cockpit ripping down the spinnaker. And I remember getting the call that we'd crossed the line, and I was actually, I'll be like a little bit emotional. Probably had a couple of, quiet little sort of, little tears to myself, like, because it was pretty overwhelming, to get through that, it's a massive physical effort. And with the crew that we'd all sailed together for a good while now. And it was an amazing feeling to get down there,
What did it teach you about yourself?
Every year it teaches me something more, or I think I apply what I've sort of learning year on year is a lot more like resilience. And as I say, like seasickness has been a factor for me, and it's about like acknowledging it and then just working out a way to get yourself out of that hole, and it's really difficult because when you're out there, it's not a theme park. There's no off switch.
Yeah.
You can't push a button and eject. You're on that boat in those conditions and you just got to work your way through it. I think some people, it comes a lot easier than others. And you can see some of the crew when they're out there after, a day or two of, and you don't get much sleep. It's really taxing, but it's about, just coming together as a crew and that common goal of driving the boat as fast as you can 24 hours a day and, pushing through and some resilience, to get to the finish.
Oh, it would be the ultimate test, like for what you can, I guess, deal with, but also having that adrenaline, keeping it going too. And it sounds like it's played a big part in your life at multiple stages too.
And applying that, year on year, as I say, like, sail racing's been a whole other sort of era of the industry and a skill set that I've had to learn. And we've been really lucky to sail with some really top level people on Drumfire, a lot of them being some of the best female sailors, and just learning from those people. And I'm a lot better, I think, sailor in a racing sense than I was, last year or the year before. And it's just year on year, just trying to improve and really contribute, in a technical sense to the driving of, the boat and being a real part of the team to get the boat down there. It's really cool, which is that competitive side I think I've always sort of had, Yeah.
What was it like winning last year?
Yeah. So look, we didn't win like overall, but it was a category win nonetheless. That was really cool. I mean, they say that the Sydney to Hobart is a shit way to get to a good party.
I love that. I've heard that before.
So you can imagine, the party that just happens down there if you finish. There's a pub down there called the Customs Inn, and that is open 24 hours a day. And it is the saltiest place like you've ever seen. You get in there, get jugs of, rum and ginger beer at whatever hours for days. I think for the owners of the boat and Phil, the captain, and that have been with that program and really sort of pushed it and put that program together. I love being part of that, and that was really cool. But it was nice to sort of see it, for the owners to get a trophy with all that your hard work and money. It's a big investment, and then also the hard work that Phil, the captain's done on that boat over years, and it was really cool. Yeah,
massive achievement. What are you looking forward to this year, aside from the party at the end?
Yeah, you sort of, as I'm getting a little bit older, I'm still like, the party at the end. As I say, it's a great party. You haven't slept for 3 or 4 days and you go down there and have, 50 beers and you do yourself no favors. I'm not sure I'm looking forward to it, but I will do. You do get into it.
Yeah.
First and foremost is just getting down to Hobart, safely. That's the number one objective. And then from there, we, do it as fast and as efficient as we can. Once again, just, I feel like I'm a better sailor than I was last year, and I've tried to learn some more and just, contribute to the crew, more so than I've done in the past to really, help improve the performance of the boat is one of my goals.
Yeah.
And look, once again, if we were to win the class, that's the goal, would be amazing. It's a real tough race.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, such a cool thing to be a part of though.
Yeah.
So especially doing it 4 years, it's impressive. And I would imagine something that you'd look forward to doing a few more of them after.
Yeah,
what do you reckon?
Once again, it's time of year thing. Like with a young family, Boxing Day is a really shitty day to go away. Jess and the kids are at home. They were fully supporting me doing it. But Jess is, I get home on New Year's Eve, buggered, and they're like, right, now it's holidays. And it takes a toll on the family, in that regard. So we'll see. I mean, I sort of said last year, maybe it would be the last. And then they said they were doing it again. I was like, let's go, So,
force myself. Can't help but have a good time.
Yeah. Well, after winning, you still you want to, it's pretty hard not to. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't threaten me with a good time. Take me through then. Why did you decide when you back on land, family time, what was the appeal of Brokerage and why also Dalboro? Did you first go there?
So after finishing up in the professional crew sense, I actually sort of had a bit of time out of the industry, and I just had a sales role for a construction company, up on the Central Coast. So, I had a 3-year-old or 2.5-year-old and a newborn. And so really wanted to be close to home. But then I sort of worked out, I guess, over that year that I really missed the industry, and missed all my friends and connections within the industry, that the crew at the trades and stuff you get to know around Sydney and at the marinas and the marina staff and all that sort of stuff.
What's special about the industry? I know it's the people like you talked about mostly, but is there anything that makes it almost that much harder to be away from it after you've had so much time in it?
I think it was still that, like lack of adventure. I knew that I didn't know what the next adventures were going to be, because I wasn't working on boats anymore, but it was still like, I didn't want to give up the opportunity for one. I didn't know what it was going to be. And it turned out to be the Drumfire program and getting to do that sailing and stuff, which I was still like a little bit involved with, but it was sort of that. And I was a bit like, I never really had a normal job as well.
Yeah.
Like a 9 to 5 and had to go to an office. I've literally never had that. And so then doing that, I was a bit like, I'm not sure this is for me.
Yeah, that's a bit of a change.
Yeah, real change. And so a good mate of mine, Matt Walford, he'd been a broker for a long time and was running Dalbora Marine, still is running Dalbora Marine. And we'd been, good mates since uni, but never worked together. We'd always worked in separate sides of the industry. And sort of guess I'd always, never being a broker sort of was that appealing.
Yeah.
But it was an opportunity to get back into the industry, but a little bit on my terms. And so, the role was being a broker is in the setup that they have at Dalbora had a lot of flexibility in the sense I wear the Dalbora t-shirt, but I'm a contractor. So, I manage my own time. I manage where I'm going to be. They give you an office and there's some expectations around that, but it allowed me to be really flexible with the family and traveling, commuting and whatnot. And it was a way of, just applying a lot of my skill set that I had. I mean, albeit there was a lot to learn because, one thing super yachts, you're not involved in any sort of business. One thing it does teach you to do very well and respectfully is to spend money. It doesn't teach you how to make money.
Yep.
You're doing it, the right way, but, you're not involved really in a business. And I really wanted to get involved in a business and, and so that was when the change, but then, learning, business, essentially, the boat side of things was sort of easy when it came to the brokering, but learning sales, negotiation and stuff was a big learning curve and a hard one.
So you kind of had the perception, which is what most people do about the brokerage side of things. And then now that you're quite a few years in, how is it different than that?
Yeah, I guess there is ideas of, and you see a few people come and go, like ideas of grandeur, but when once you get into the industry, like I cut my teeth sort of literally just selling anything. And this was all through COVID as well.
You got in at a good time then.
Well, I wish I'd got into it maybe a year or so before because those guys that did and that were set up and had the network and had the stock, some guys made a lot of money. Some brokers made a lot of money. And I didn't sell anything for the first 5 months.
Right.
Once again, that was during COVID. Like just getting your first listings are hard. But then at that time, there wasn't a lot of listings out there. So it was actually a really hard time to start. But I maybe thought that, it'd be bigger and shinier sort of sooner, but that's just not the case because the market in Australia, is very different to what we see on Instagram and what we see in Europe as well. And there's only so many boats of sort of like a certain nature that are traded each year, by a certain amount of brokers, So that didn't really sort of get to me, but it was a bit of a realization. Okay, all right. So, after now 4 years down the track, like I've sold close to 100 boats. I've now got personally probably like $7 or $8 million worth of listings to my name, to be sold and have, learned a lot about business and a lot about, once again, like resilience and pushing through. There's been some hard financial times in the last year for everyone, I think. And, the luxury market really was pretty difficult.
Yeah.
It's been good. Yeah.
What do you think is one of the takeaways from your past careers, like working on the super yachts and just being a captain, but also I think a big thing like we talked about was just the relationship management almost and how you can understand an owner or bring a crew together. Like what are some of those things that you think you've brought to, I guess, this role right now?
I think there's a couple of things that have really been a factor. One is like the touch back on the, the worldly travel is that you deal with like lots of weird and wonderful people when you're traveling the world. And in, boat broking, you deal with some weird and wonderful people as well. Like there's some interesting people out there that own boats and that's selling boats and are buying boats and just being open, I guess, to that and not being, I guess, spooked by it. That's a factor. But then also taking the skill set of being like when you're a captain on boats, and particularly when I was running the Sarissa chase boat program, is that your knowledge base of a boat of, mechanics, engineering, 12-volt systems, 24-volt systems, generators, water makers, plumbing, electrical, air conditioning, refrigeration. You need to be able to fix or diagnose these problems when you're running a boat. So you know a lot about this, and then you know a lot of the trades in Sydney that fix these. And so that was a real benefit going into boat brokering because we're talking about selling brokerages, secondhand boats. And all boats have issues, you know?
Yeah.
We know that.
Yeah.
So being able to decipher those issues and turn that into either value adds for the buyers or value minuses when you're sort of selling and helping people assess those problems, meeting people like, Aaron, the surveyors, boat buyer, and Gavin Clark and those sorts of guys that come and survey these boats, and really being able to talk on the level sort of straight off the bat. They're reading these reports. That was a main thing that sort of coming from running boats to then selling them was a real benefit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great because you can look out for both sides as well and come at it with an educated perspective on like what's best. And so I think what I mentioned before too is like, finding boats for people. I'd be interested to know like, from your understanding and working with the owners and helping them build boats and I guess find boats based on how they're going to use it. Like how does that play into what you do now?
Honestly, not so much in the sense of like finding boats, right? So with a boat broker, there is this sort of idea that you're selling boats and you're also finding boats for people. Now, in some different markets around the world, that really does come into it. The European and the American market, you'll have a buyer advocate or a broker on that side of the transaction. In Australia, you do have that, but it's not as much. Yeah. So what I was sort of worked out is that where to actually make money as a broker is to list and sell boats.
Right.
That's where you make your money. You help people out, with potentially finding boats. But as I say, of the 100 boats I've sold, that's probably happened twice.
Yeah, right.
2% of all the transactions.
Right.
So I've sort of found my little patch, I guess, in the Australian market is say like, representing boat owners to a really high level and selling their boats. That's where they get paid. That's how we get paid,
Yeah.
And then fostering the relationships then with the buyers to support them when they buy the boats and on their adventures. And then hopefully then that turns into another transaction, down the line when they go to sell or upgrade or something like that.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I'm starting to see that now after a few years of actual sort of clients returning, and you're sort of still doing a lot of business development work yourself to find new listings and sales. But my phone rings a lot more than it used to. That's for sure, with people just business coming back my way. So,
Clear sign that you're doing something right.
Yeah, I'd like to think so. I mean, there's some boats you sell that you never want to see again. You're just like, wow, I never want to see that boat again. But it's all been a learning experience, really high sort of transactional experience. And there's been some interesting ones across the time,
Imagine, If you could go back to the start, is there anything that you do differently? Thinking about your whole life, career journey?
No, I don't think so. I think I would have liked to have maybe pushed a bit more into the captaining sort of some bigger boats and whatnot, but I'm not regretful that I didn't because, other opportunities and experiences have happened because I didn't do that, So I would have been interesting to sort of go into that sort of real, captain of some, super yachts, but it's been pretty cool everything else that's happened.
That's awesome. Yeah. What would you double down on?
Probably wish I'd maybe got into the sail racing side of things sooner, because I've really, enjoyed that. I mean, that's also been a really privilege to be involved in that crew because there are a bunch of great people, but learning the real technical side, of sailing a yacht fast, whatever the sort of prevailing conditions could have been. And at the same time, I would have got to compete, you know what I mean? So maybe doing that, but that wouldn't have changed much in my career, I don't think. That's sort of like the hobby side, the fun side of it,
Oh, I love that. Whatever you believe, like meant to be or not, like it's great to look back at the journey and just be happy with all that you've gone through and the different chapters and see how they add up to where you are now.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. What's the best piece of feedback that you've ever received over your career? Or what's one that stands out to you? And how do you think it's changed you or changed your trajectory?
I think there's been one sort of like individual piece of, feedback, but I guess it just knowing, or when someone tells you that you've done a good job, whether it be the captain or the owner, and they come around and shake your hand and thank you for, the trip that you guys have just chartered for them or put them on, the family really enjoyed it. That was always, at the end of the day, there's a paid position, but at the same time being recognized that they had a great time, because there's one factor about like, being the crew on the super yachts, and I sort of worked this out, from my hospitality background, is that it's one thing to keep the boats, driving the boats, but where it actually comes in is the hospitality. It's about tending to people's needs on these boats, and seeing to their relaxation and enjoyment. And that's where the tips are at,
That's true.
Yeah.
Well, I think that also probably plays a large part in the success you're seeing now in the brokerage side of things, right?
Yeah, recognizing that at the end of the day, there's a leisure activity. you know, and we can get caught out in the features of the boat sometimes. And one of your previous podcasts, her name escapes me, but you know,
Rebecca,
I think so. Talking about we get caught up in the features of the boat, but ultimately it's like what the boat you can do with it and where it can take you and what you can, you know, how you'll enjoy it, you know, is actually the cool thing about boats.
It is. And it's like, it's a reminder, I think, to think of why you're actually getting into boating in the first place. Like, instead of just the material things, well, like, what is it going to give you in your life, which is a cool way to do it. And you do a great job of that in some of your content too that I like. I'd love to know a little bit too about like content playing a big part in what you're doing on social media and brokerage growth. Like, how does that play into what you do? Yeah,
I see like the content side of it, like it's definitely important, but it's not the be all and end all. It's the way that I sort of approach it. You know, I see it as a marketing layer, you know, I think there's a lot of things you need to do. Maybe I'm a little bit old school, like in the sense of like it's a genuine service game, you know, with phone calls, you know, FaceTime with people, shaking hands, being on boats is what builds relationships and what builds sales and stuff. I think the content side of it is a really good, not necessarily sales tool, but it's a really good research tool for when you want to go and do business with someone, you know, whether, I don't know, if it's looking to sell my house, you might look at some of the some real estate agents that go, oh, I'm not sure I like that guy, you know? So I use it as, you know, the basis of a research tool that people sort of look and go, he's really active. He knows what he's talking about. He's representing some really cool boats. And maybe I'd like him to represent me with, say, my boat, you know?
I've always found too, along those lines, because it is who you know in person, right? So it's a content, I think, is another great way to expand your circle and get people to kind of build a little trust or take the wall down a little bit before they actually meet you in person where you can do all that important work.
Yeah.
But without that, without them seeing it, you know, you're kind of within your circle at the mercy of your network and however you do your, you know, outbound or who's going to refer you. It's a great way to kind of, expand that.
Definitely. And after once again, listening to a few of your podcasts and a bit of your stuff, like whether it's changing into this, but it's about, you know, like if you've got a boat, it's about seeing behind the curtain, about how people, you know, like how that boat works, or about the individual, the sales guy, the story behind him, giving those little peeks. That's what people want to see on social media.
Yeah.
You know, absolutely. I know that's, you know, it's like pretty commonplace now, but like that's also hard to then think of that content sometimes when you are, you know, busy, you know, doing all your sales stuff and just sort of day to day, you know, it does take planning and it does take thought and some, you know, creativity.
Spot on. And it's about connection and being like authentic. And yes, it's a bit weird probably as a broker to go, this is about kind of me, but also the boat. But like people want to buy from people and do business with people that they know, like, and trust, right? So it's just another way to do it. Yeah, you can talk about the features and functions and stuff, but if it's you're selling the same boat and someone else is and same price and everything, or maybe that person's a little bit cheaper, but I like them a little bit more, like I'm more inclined to go chat to that person, right?
And there's some people that like have met, you know, whether they're being clients or buyers or other just trades in the industry that I don't really know that they followed me, and they'll be like, oh man, I love that video you did on that. And I was like, oh, you saw that? They're like, yeah, that was a really cool video. It was just a little, you know, like showing an engine room, you know, because we show like the flybridge and where you can lie down, but like do people actually see, you know, like how the systems actually work? That peek behind the curtain, I think some people are liking it. And that's where, once again, going back on having the knowledge, you know, from running these boats and working, I can confidently talk about those, those, I say features of the boat, but those points of the boat that actually, how you run these boats, how they actually work, you know?
Well, and coming from a place of authority makes people go, I can trust this guy even more because he knows what he's talking about. So I think that's a great way to do it. And, you know, going back to like what people actually see, no one ever sees every single piece of content you put out, right? But you'd be surprised what they do see.
Yeah,
like,
that's right.
And so like, it's another way to kind of, I guess, lower the barrier of actually creating the stuff, knowing that like not everyone's just sitting there like, ooh, what's Adam posting today? Like, you know, it's great if they are, which, you know, probably the mom, who else? Like we got a few people.
Yeah. My mom always gives me a like, you know?
But I think it's such an important thing and you do a really good job at it. So
I appreciate that.
Because you can tell you're like authentic, you get a bit of personality in there, which is really good.
Yeah, nice. Appreciate that. Yeah.
I got some rapid fire questions for you.
Sure.
What's your favorite port and why?
One would be like Mallorca, Palma, Mallorca, which is where sort of it all started for me. You know, really fond memories around that marina and shipyard, working in some refits there over the time as well. But then in the old town of Palma, some cool little apartments we lived in and some cool bars and restaurants and stuff. So yeah, that's probably number one. Yeah, nostalgia. And then number two is probably getting down to Hobart, you know, just seeing that marina and seeing that port, you know, that's one you're really looking forward to when you get down there, you know? Yeah.
It's the pictures of ginger beer and rum, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
What's the wildest thing you've seen while out to sea?
Probably been some of the marine life that you see, you know, like you don't expect to see it, but you know it's there. But, you know, like up at the Whitsundays, you know, some of the scuba diving we did up there and, you know, like the whales when they're transitioning up and down and literally having to dodge whales, you know, and you do hear stories of boats hitting whales. It's, you know, it's not good for anyone. It's particularly the whale. But yeah, the marine life has always been amazing to see. I remember one night coming to Gibraltar, you have this stuff called phosphorescence in the water, and it basically makes like the water glow, and there was dolphins playing around the boat, so it literally looked like glowing torpedoes that were the dolphins just flying through the water and just jumping around. I remember that being like, yeah, pretty memorable from just a wildlife point of view out there.
That's definitely one of those things that people go like, is this real life? It's just wild. That's awesome.
Exactly. Yeah.
What's your go-to meal after you get home from a long stint at sea?
My go-to meal, like when I'm maybe not feeling the best, or if you just want something like that's done served me really well, particularly on the City of Hobart's, is just chicken pot noodles. Like literally just that. You can have it any time of day. You just chuck some water in it. Like you got a hot meal, and when you may be feeling a little bit ginger or you're just coming out of that seasickness hole, like it sort of sits well. And so that's, you know, saved me, and I'll probably get through a few of them, you know, on the next trip.
Have them in the back pocket.
Yeah.
Who inspires you right now in the yachting world, in the marine industry?
There's some pretty amazing people doing it. Like right now there's the Vendée Globe, which is a solo round the world race going on, and that's in these 65-foot weapons of boats, and they're solo right now, and there's about 20 of them, maybe more, out in the Southern Ocean somewhere just sending it. I have no will or desire to do that race. They are a special breed of people, and they'll be on their own out there, you know, for 80 days, you know, sailing around the world. It's pretty, I mean, to think that what we do is, you know, the City of Hobart goes for 3 or 4 days, they're doing it for 80. You know, like that's pretty cool, you know. And yes, some of the guys out there doing some amazing adventures on boats, you know, to far-flung places, and is pretty inspirational, you know.
Definitely. Yeah, I can't imagine. Yeah, you're not pulling up at any port anytime, depending on the weather.
It's crazy what they do, yeah.
What's the most challenging part of being a yacht broker?
It is the highs and lows, you know, and dealing with different people. Every transaction is different. You know, you've got a vendor who's got an idea, you've got a buyer who's got an idea, and they're in different like psychological states about how they want to approach it. You need to broach the middle of it. Sometimes you don't get there. And, you know, the expression, like, don't count your chips at the table or whatever it is, it's like you can have, you know, don't count the commission before it's in, you know, because you've had some juicy ones fall over, and it's in that competitive sense, it's pretty upsetting, you know, and you know, it could really make or break a year, you know. So that's been a challenge. I've dealt with some really, really nice people, and also some really horrible people, you know, like I genuinely say that, you know, people you don't want to see again, you know. Yeah,
no filter, I guess, when you're dealing with general public.
Yeah,
it's unfortunate.
And look, some people, you know, they're wealthy individuals and they have a lot of money. We're dealing with quite sort of high wealth assets, and I've learned you got to take the emotion out of it. I only deal in fact. Now I try my best, but it can get emotional at times, particularly for them, and then the emotion can bring out nasty sides of people sometimes, you know. Right. And they're the people you don't want to do business with again, you know. But
what's your favorite boat name you've ever seen?
Some of the boat names you see, and I really can't, nothing comes to mind at the moment, but they're the same people that name racehorses sometimes. You know, you're like, wow, just this really weird and wonderful names. You know, I guess I'm maybe a little bit of a traditionalist. Like I do like, there's some beautiful sailboats out there, and I think all boats, you know, are female, and there's some beautiful names of some beautiful sailboats, you know, going around. That nothing just sort of stands out, but you like, that name Rebecca or something really suits that beautiful, you know, classic sailboat. So
I like it. What's your favorite piece of boating advice to give to people?
Just go and use the boat. You know, like we can run through like how it all works and stuff, but if they've got the general level of capabilities there, but like go and use the boat. Just keep a list of all the items that you've either got questions about or don't work or head scratches or whatever, then come back and we'll work through it all. But just go and use it, you know? Lots of people are really sort of afraid to use it. And if you need to develop your skill set, you know, like there's guys out there that offers professional skippering and training and that sort of stuff, get that. Because if it's not enjoyable or you find it stressful, you're not going to like it. And, and that's us dealing with a few guys that have bought boats. Look, I get to sell the boat again, but, ultimately they just didn't like it and maybe didn't go about it the right way as well.
It's a shame too, because it's like, what boating can give you, and to have a bad experience is just, not the good taste that you want to leave in someone's mouth too, and knowing what they're missing out.
Yeah, that's right.
How do you want to leave us today?
I guess now I've been through the marine industry and still in it, obviously a myriad of different factors. It was an industry that I stepped into not really knowing anything about it, and when you start looking into it, there's a lot of great people. It's a huge industry with a myriad of different careers that you can have, whether it be professional crew or trades. And in that trades, you've got all different sectors in that, you're quite exposed to the fishing side of things. That's another sector of the industry, the professional sailing side of the industry, boat building, marinas and all that. Ultimately it's a leisure industry. And so I think it's been great to me. It's about to work in a myriad of factors. And at the end of the day, I still love the fact that it is a leisure industry and it doesn't necessarily always feel like work.
Yeah.
You still got to make a career, make it financially work for you, but ultimately, it's been really good fun. And I'm not sure what the next sort of adventure is. I'm open to it, and we'll see what comes.
Love it. Yeah, we are very lucky to be in such the great industry. That's awesome.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Thankful to know you too. You work at a great spot. So yeah, thank you for coming in and having the podcast today. If anyone wants to sell their boat or looking for one, you know where to go. Adam's down at Dalbora Spit in Sydney. And I know everyone's going to take a lot away from your insights and loved your stories. They're amazing. What an experience.
I appreciate it, Steve. Yeah, no, thanks, mate. I love your podcast and what you're up to as well. And
awesome.
I've shed some light on, where the career and the industry can take you in different facets. Hopefully some people might get some stuff out of it.
Yeah. I'll put your Instagram in the show notes and LinkedIn as well. And go have a chat with them. Thank you again. If you enjoyed this episode, definitely share it with someone who you think would as well. Catch you on the next episode of the Rising Tidecast.